The following is the first in a 7-part video series on the game Sol Cresta. Each video will cover a different level of the game as well as a different discussion topic as I take you through a complete 1-credit clear run of the game's highest difficulty setting, Platinum Hard. What immediately separates Sol Cresta from its peers is that you're not just controlling a single ship, but a whole 3-person squad which you can freely disassemble and reorganize to create a wide array of weapon combinations. And while split up, drawing different shapes with your trail of team members will create extremely powerful formation attacks. The catch is that in order to use these moves, you first need to grab the corresponding chip throughout each level of the game. I'm juggling one of these right now. The formation it initially displays when spawned is always chosen randomly, but as you can see, it cycles through all 5 every time it's shot. I'm particularly fond of this feature because it introduces random elements into the game while also minimizing the downsides that typically come from randomness. You're always able to obtain whatever formation you're looking for with perfect consistency, but the amount of shots it takes to reach that formation will vary, creating scenarios subtly different enough to allow for some level of memorization while still requiring you to split your attention between the chip and any incoming bullets. Failing to manage the two and picking up an unintended formation is a minor setback, but one with the potential to cause complex ripples of consequence. Shooting formation chips also has some extra hidden depth to it as well. If you continuously juggle the same chip for about a minute, an icon of Platinum Games' mascot, PT Shirogane, will pop out, granting you a whopping 10 extra lives. The vertical line formation is my personal favorite. It covers a wide range and also shows off the strengths of Sol Cresta's drawing system. Efficient play doesn't just mean dodging curtains of bullets, it means dodging with the same motions required to initiate formation attacks. In the case of the vertical line, the most obvious way to draw it is to just go straight upwards, but the hitbox of your formations are always placed wherever your leading ship is, meaning that if you draw straight up, your hitbox will be at the top, making it very difficult to kill anything without taking damage yourself. Ideally, you'll first want to travel up the screen, then start drawing the line while flying back down. When deciding on strategies, it's not enough to just consider what formations you have access to. You also need to consider if you have the physical space necessary to create them. Especially on higher difficulties, there are plenty of situations where you'll be under so much fire that it's not feasible to take on a specific formation, and you'll have to settle for an alternative. In this way, the drawing system creates much more spontaneous, on-the-fly decisions than if the attacks had been tied to simple button presses. My go-to strategy for this boss fight is to use the vertical line, but I lost access to it, and my next best option was the angled formation and attack with a completely different range, requiring me to position myself in a much more awkward way than if I had used the vertical line. Normally, collecting a chip means that that formation will be unlocked for the remainder of the stage. Not so on Platinum Hard. On this difficulty, they're single-use items. If you want to use the same attack twice, you have to grab that chip all over again. On one hand, this is a pretty significant reduction in player freedom, but on the other hand, it creates an equally significant increase in improvised play. The tools you have available can completely change the direction and pace of an encounter, so these limits on formation attacks ensure that combat hardly ever plays out the same way twice. Formations aside, there are still plenty of ways to attack. Piloting a team of 2 or more ships gives you access to a sub-weapon, which is determined by which ship you have in second place. My personal favorite is the drill. It's a great offensive tool if you're ballsy enough to point-blank enemies, but it's also an equally great defensive tool. It can cancel most bullets it comes into contact with, each one refilling the formation gauge by a single %. So if you use it during a heavy storm of bullets, you fill the gauge very quickly, offsetting the cost of using the drill almost immediately. Sub-weapons are also useful for destroying the different types of colored obstacles. In a lesser game, you'd have to change your leading ship to the corresponding color before you can destroy these, but not so in Sol Cresta. You can use your sub-weapon or even the passive tertiary weapon. No matter what attack you use, as long as it matches the color of the obstacle, you'll destroy it. It's a small but important touch, one that speaks to how intuitive and flexible this game's design truly is, sidestepping the rigidity that usually comes from obstacles which require you to match colors. Now that we've been knocked down to 2 team members, it's worth explaining how the formation mechanic has changed. The 3-person formations are now off limits, but 2-person teams have a few built-in formations of their own that you don't have to collect a chip to use. However, on Platinum Hard, they're still subject to the same limitations that 3-person formations are, so once you use one of these, you'll lose access to it until the next time your team has only 2 members in it. The mechanics of the game changing based on team count is not only another way to make gameplay more spontaneous and dynamic, but also to raise tension in a very interesting way, because not only do mistakes bring you one step closer to death, they also change how you're allowed to engage with the game, if only slightly. It's a way to kick the player while they're down, but still leave them plenty of room to recover. One of the weakest aspects of Sol Cresta, relative to other shmups, is the game's boss fights. In a typical bullet hell game, bosses have several optional weak points which can be destroyed for points, and oftentimes destroying those weak points will trigger harder bullet patterns to be thrown at the player. It's classic risk versus reward stuff, but unfortunately Sol Cresta doesn't opt for that style of boss design. This is one of the only bosses in the game with multiple weak points, none of which are optional, none of which significantly alter bullet patterns. There is still value in this game's boss design, however, mostly in the joy that comes from seeing just how fast you can kill them. Both the laser sub-weapon and the Phoenix form absolutely chew through boss health bars, trivializing them somewhat, but in a way that allows the player to express total confidence and mastery over the system. So despite there being some pretty huge missed opportunities with the bosses, I do still find them mildly satisfying in a power fantasy sort of way. The final stage of the boss fight is the first time a specific nuance of the game's drawing system is brought to light. The main turret here shoots a laser which, if not destroyed quickly, rotates a full 360 just fast enough to outrun the player. If you want to dodge it, you'll have to use the drawing function, which has the side effect of slowing down time. It's a great defensive option for beginner players, and tapping the button rather than holding it ensures you won't enter a formation attack on accident. Coming up here is a pretty strange exploit that I'm going to be getting a lot of mileage out of. At the end of each level, any leftover formation chips are added to your point total and then taken away so that you can start the next level with a fresh slate. However, if you manage to juggle a formation chip during the results screen and wait to collect it until after the rest of your chips have been cleared, the newly collected chip will not be erased, and you'll start the next level with it already in stock. This extra chip is really going to come in handy on the next level, where we'll be discussing the game's scoring system, its conveyance, and a few other topics as well, so stay tuned.